Hare Krishna, everyone. Welcome to this week's edition of the Hare Krishnas in Britain podcast. This is episode number 39. We've managed to make it to 39 episodes over the last year and a half. Thank you to everyone who continues to tune in on a regular basis, either on YouTube or Facebook, to meet our guests, to listen to what I might have to say, and to find out what the Hare Krishna movement and devotees are doing around the country. Some of you would have seen on social media that I've just returned from Blackpool, sunny Blackpool. I've kind of fallen in love with Blackpool. It's got really beautiful views. And I was there for 3 or 4 days last weekend. And I was there with this wonderful gentleman, Gadai. Hey, Gadai.
Hi, Narad.
Thank you. Well, firstly, thank you for inviting me to Blackpool. It was great. And the pandemic meant that it was my first time in 3 years, because I wasn't allowed to drive at the motorway before. And and thank you for coming on the podcast this week. And I was certainly really, and we're going to talk about this a bit later on, but I was very intrigued and impressed by what I was seeing in Blackpool in terms of sharing Krishna consciousness. It's quite phenomenal. And one of the things you're going to do on today's episode is share some of the kind of, I think, radical and progressive things that you're doing to make Krishna consciousness relatable to normal people. But before we go on to that, let's just chat a bit about you. Tell us a bit about you and where you're from.
Yeah, sure. Well, I was born in Bournemouth, but at a very early age, I moved to Scotland for my sins, and I lived there for 50 years before I moved down to Blackpool. So that's that's where I'm from. But,
50 years, that's half a century. I love how you just said that. I was there for 50 years and then I left.
So, yeah, but my introduction to Krishna consciousness came in Scotland. The first time I came across the devotees, I think I was about 9, 10 perhaps, walking along Princess Street in Edinburgh, and the devotees were out chanting, dancing, and I remember just being stopped in my tracks and standing with my mouth open, thinking, wow, what's this? And my mother grabbing me by the hood and dragging me up, keep away from those people. Which, a few years later, our worst nightmares were to come true. I actually got involved. My second meeting with the devotees was not such a great exchange. I was shopping with a then girlfriend, and we'd left her little sister at the shop front. And as I turned and looked out the doorway, there was a devotee trying to take money out of her purse. So I kind of sprinted to the scene and had an exchange with said devotee, and that kind of left me thinking sourly about the devotees for a long time. And I think thinking about the devotees, even in a bad way, perhaps gave me some kind of spiritual acumen that I'd been thinking about Krishna, that afforded me the opportunity to maybe take my next stage, which was being arrested in London after a New Model Army gig, a punk band I used to follow. We got arrested on drug charges and spent the evening in the jail in Brixton. And on the travel home, I was lying in the back of a friend's car at a service station, and my friends had gone in to get something to eat. And there was a knock on a window, and a devotee was there holding the first canto Bhagavatam. We're just giving these books out today. And I had an incredible kind of 5-minute exchange with this devotee. And when my friends came back, I forced them to empty their pockets, and we all gave what little change we had in exchange for this Srimad Bhagavatam. And although I never managed to read it myself, I remember giving it to a couple of friends who were going through difficult times and saying, "You really need to read this book. I got it from a wonderful guy. Don't know what it's about. I've not read it myself. You'll find the answers that you need in there." And then a couple of years later, a lot more drugs, a lot more alcohol, and my gran died, and I saw her leave her body, and that was quite a poignant experience for me. And at that point, I started to look into a few different things spiritually, looked at some different scriptures, tried to read the Bible, Quran, usual suspects. And a friend of mine had a few Hare Krishna books on the shelf that his then girlfriend had picked up in Edinburgh when she used to meet the devotees when she was at college. So I started trying to read them, and I was really struggling with them, couldn't make head nor tail of them. And I remember really one night just thinking, you know what, the hell with all this. And I threw half a dozen books on the bed, and I went out and hit the pub, had a few beers. And when I came back that night, the Prabhupada's biography was lying at the top of the pile. He built a house the whole world could live in, which ironically we've changed the name of now to just Prabhupada. But the original was called He Built a House the Whole World Could Live In. And I was so attracted by the picture of Prabhupada, I started reading biography, and for that whole week, I just read my way through this book. And at the end was a phone number for Krishna Bhavan. So I phoned up and told them I was coming to join at the end of the book, to which I was told that I couldn't really come and join. I had to go through the process of coming to Nam Hats. And so I started visiting Nam Hats, met a few of the devotees, spent a couple of weekends at Krishna Bhavan. And I think it was either the winter of 88 or the winter of 89, I came and I did the marathon and stayed, and then spent about 7 or 8 years in the ashram after that.
Wow.
So that was kind of how I came across the devotees.
So you were living at Karuna Bhavan in the late 80s, early 90s.
Right through till about 97, maybe 98. Sometimes I remember going to India in 96 for Prabhupada's Centennial, and I think I hung on for a couple of years after that. And so probably till about 98.
So certainly back at the time, and probably for at least a decade after that, Karuna Bhavan had a reputation for a lot of things, but one of the things that had a positive reputation for, I think, was book distribution and raising a lot of money.
Yeah.
So tell us a bit about what that was like, in terms of what was happening to make you guys distribute so many books.
I mean, we had a charismatic leader, no doubt. Balabhadra was charismatic, and I think he was kind of from that kind of Scottish Presbyterian, hard work ethic, and a lot of certainly the devotees that were heading things up from were from that same kind of Scottish upbringing, hard working, and we kind of took that ethic into Krishna consciousness. I mean, there was a lot of kind of other coercive and kind of warped philosophies going on around about that as well. But, I don't really want to get into too much of that today. But there was certainly, and whatever you do for God, there's a reciprocation. So there was a certain buzz about the place, and we were all dedicated to that mission. But unfortunately, it wasn't really wrapped in care. It was more wrapped in surrender, no matter what was going on in your personal life. So there wasn't a lot of individual care. So there was a high turnover of devotees as well going through that kind of system, although a lot of book distribution was achieved and a lot of money was raised to support a lot of other projects. There wasn't a lot of money spent on devotee care or development of the project. It was almost like kill yourself for Krishna kind of mood. But within that, you know, we had some great fun. We were doing a lot of kind of festival programs. I was involved in we had a Sankirtan house down in the Huddersfield on Emily Moor, and we would go to different areas and promote festivals. We'd run a festival kind of once a month and run knock-on Nam hats from there. So at one point, I think it was a squad of maybe 5 or 6 of us, and we were doing something like 7 Nam hats a week in a 5-day week. So some weeks we had 2 Nam hats in the evening, and we'd simultaneously be advertising for our next festival as well, and making all the arrangements for that. So there was a lot of exciting times, but from my own experience, although you know, you felt a lot of reciprocation with God by making that surrender, there wasn't a lot of space for personal development, you know, and really internalizing the process. So, you know, after maybe 8 years of that kind of surrender, when I took a step out of the ashram, I kind of really felt that although I'd done a lot of service and made a lot of surrender, I hadn't really made a lot of spiritual advancement. And internally. You know?
I mean, I certainly hear kind of mixed reviews and mixed opinions on the Balabhadra days at Karuna Bhavan. It's not all bad, you know, but there's some, you know, I've heard mixed things, you know, until I think, just so some kind of factual context, people. So, well, I have actually talked to another devotee on this podcast before about Balabhadra. So we talked about that. Those of you that read my book, I've talked about Balabhadra too. So right, like Gadai, I don't want to kind of dwell on it too much, but just so some factual context for our listeners, Balabhadra was then removed as a leader, as a sannyasi in ISKCON, I think around 2006.
Yeah.
And he did then, he did retake sannyas, or was given sannyas then in a different mat, by I think Paramadvaita Swami sometime later. And Balabhadra is still with us, I believe, on the planet. He lives in Scotland.
Yeah, in Dunfermline.
And he still has a following. He still has.
It has 1 or 2 devotees that have stuck round about him, you know, and I'm sure the amount of effort that he put into to try and assist Prabhupada's mission wouldn't have gone unnoticed by Krishna. You know, there's no doubt there was mistakes made, but if we look back historically, there's a lot more mistakes in Balabhadra been made within the movement, and when we look at that time period, devotees were trying to, you know, pick up slack, take responsibility, and I think perhaps the way certain devotees were promoted didn't help either. You know, I think, you know, historically now that certain devotees took up the mantle of spiritual master or acharya after Prabhupada left. And we can see the complications that's created, you know, that, you know, they perhaps accepted the position and started to believe their own hype to some degree, you know, that actually they were qualified to be in that position, but which it wasn't fact. You know, we have different levels of guru, and although I don't subscribe to the Ritvic system, we still have to keep in mind that Prabhupada was the acharya, and everybody came after that's just regular guru. But, you know, people are people, human nature is human nature. Some devotees started to think themselves in a position perhaps higher than what they were, or a level of practice above what they were actually practicing at. Disciples elevate their own spiritual master to the level of Prabhupada because everybody wants a Prabhupada, you know. And unfortunately, more people than not want to be Prabhupada. rather than serve Prabhupada.
I find it quite I find it quite difficult when still in ISKCON today you see kind of 3-day Vyasa Puja festivals for some of our living gurus, which is
I don't
completely
think
over
it's
the top.
healthy. I don't think it's healthy for the individual, and I don't think it's healthy for the follower, but because inevitably, as we see historically, you know, a high percentage of these devotees will have some difficulty or have some ups and downs in life, and that can cause a real conflict of faith for a lot of the followers. Whereas if from the word go, we express that we're just trying to help the mission, we're taking on these roles to assist Prabhupada, that you know, Prabhupada's the umbrella for what's going on, and we put our faith there, and that there will be mistakes. Then if that had happened from, you know, 1977 when Prabhupada left the planet, we know we would have a different movement. You know, and interspersed with devotees actually coming out and you know, Hamsa Dutta and Satsvarup and even Tamil Krishna, they've come out and admitted that they've overstepped the mark in certain areas. You know, so we now know historically that's going on, but the issue is that there's no real honest dialogue about that. But with there's some great histories of ISKCON have just been released. Henry Doktorsky, it's written a couple of wonderful books. I never read Killing for Krishna because I was quite aware of that situation previously, and I'd read quite a lot around about that. But he did another wonderful book called 11 Naked Emperors, which it sounds quite controversial by its title, but when you read it, it's quite a level presentation of the history of ISKCON at that time, and well balanced, and he invited voices from both sides to express their opinions within that. So it does speak volumes that devotees from one perspective did come forward to speak and devotees from another perspective declined. And there's another wonderful book by Daneshwar called Spiritual Movements, The Enemies Within, Divine and Demoniac, it's called. And that's kind of looking at the breakdown of Christianity after Jesus left the planet, and comparing that to similar events that went on after the breakdown or after Srila Prabhupada left the planet, the kind of Sonalacharya situation, and it's a great, real kind of level-headed kind of look at the situation, and also it looks at the state of the world and the control systems that are in place in the world, and looks at the idea that it's not too much of a stretch of the imagination that perhaps ISKCON could have been infiltrated on certain levels as well. So there's some interesting histories out there that give us a kind of broader perspective of what's going on, rather than just the kind of rose-tinted biographies and memories that are out there, which are wonderful as well, which show a beautiful side of Prabhupada and his personal interaction with, and how he touched all these devotees, and the wonderful contribution that Prabhupada made to spreading God consciousness. But also we have to take into consideration some of the darker sides as well, to have a balanced view of what actually went on. So there's interesting literature right there.
So in terms of your own story, your own narrative, you know, Balabhadra Khan had left ISKCON around the mid-noughties. Were you still around Karuna Bhavan at the time? At what point did you leave Scotland, or Les Mahego, and how did you get to Blackpool?
Well, I kind of came and went. You know, you spend some time in an institution, and then I left. I went back to a village I came from, met my now wife, and stepdaughter. And just after the birth of our first child that we had together, Tyler, who's now Taraka Das, he I think he was about just under a year, and we moved close to Lesmahago. So that was probably about maybe 3 years, 2.5 years after I left the movement. And I got a phone call from the then temple president, Prabhupada Vani, and Balabhadra was offering us a house back in Lesmahago. So we took that offer. We came back and lived as part of the community for, I don't know, maybe another 7 to 10 years or so.
Wow.
I worked as part of the community there, looking after the grounds and working on the grounds. And then of course, Bala had some difficulties and we moved away. But we stayed close. And then after maybe 2 or 3 years, Prabhupada Prana was then temple president. He came and asked me to come back and get involved. So again, I came back, took another house in the community, and stayed for another 4 or 5 years working on the community project. And then relationships between the external community and the internal community of the temple started to break down. We started to promote some what we felt were more progressive ideas for the temple moving forward and to involve the community more, which weren't really met with a great reception from the management. Relationships broke down further. We had a few difficult years trying to interface with the management and with the higher management and with the GBC, and that put a further strain on relationships to the point where I think just over 30 devotees left the community in the space of
Wow.
2 or 3 years, and we were part of that exodus from the movement. And I think that was, my comings and goings before that. I was always in that same kind of institutionalized mindset and my understanding of the philosophy, what it meant to be a devotee. And then when I left Karuna Bob in that time, after that experience of interfacing with the management and trying to open up a progressive dialogue, I was so kind of drained by that experience, disappointed by that experience, that I kind of threw everything in the bin and had to really kind of re-script myself. And that's a difficult thing because there's all sorts of complexities involved in that. There's your institutionalized mindset. There's the fact that because you'd stayed in a closed community, there's aspects of arrested development, your own immaturity, so I had to go and kind of really break myself down and rebuild myself over a few years and kind of re-script a lot of what was going on. To the point I was looking at atheism. I read some Dawkins and just trying to find some kind of reconciliation in my own head for what I'd just been through for, probably over 20 years of my life. And because I'd also got my family involved. Fortunately for myself, I was always quite level-headed about how much I involved my children. So I always just let my children do their own thing. And my daughter, even when I was having difficulties with the management, my daughter loved it. She would go and spend weekends at the temple, go to classes, even if I wasn't attending. And she loved it. She was giving talks at school about her experience as a devotee, and she was go down to visit other temples with devotees if they were traveling. So I always left my children kind of. Tyler was the opposite. He just did his normal kid thing, went to school, wasn't really so interested. He would get little bits of feedback from me, obviously, when we were talking or when I was giving him advice in life. But yeah, he was the opposite. He just didn't really get involved. And my youngest, Kyle, was a little bit too young to be involved anyway. You know, some house programs we would have, obviously, they would hear some of the dialogue that was going on. So the kids weren't too involved. So yeah, we left, and we just kind of got on with our family thing, and you know, looking at bits and bobs of other things, and then we got an opportunity to come down to Blackpool. I used to do some Namhat programs down here, probably 35 years ago now, and an old friend that used to attend them got in touch. We were on holiday in Blackpool. And we decided just to pop along and see her because she'd been in touch to see how we were keeping. And she offered us the facility of our guest house. Wow. to do some stuff. And so being kind of institutionalized to a degree, I threw out an olive branch to ISKCON to see if they would like to do something. That wasn't really met receptively. There was also some kind of parameters put on myself. So we decided just to go ahead and do something anyway. But kind of I missed out a kind of little chunk where in the process of re-scripting myself and looking through different philosophies, I came back to Prabhupada's books, but with a completely different mindset. And a kind of different perspective on things. And so, yeah, so then we tied in with Barbara. And we decided to come down once a month and start doing some stuff in Blackpool. And that's kind of where it took off. We started by inviting a few friends that we knew, and we'd come down and kind of have a well-being weekend. You know, we'd just japa together down on the seafront, and we'd have some kirtan, and we'd all eat together, and we'd discuss some philosophy over the weekend as well. And they kind of grew into monthly events, and we saw some potential, and we decided that we'd move the family down. In Scotland at that time, I'd kind of diversified I was working self-employed, but then we'd got involved in a cannabis farm. So 3 or 4 of my friends and myself were running a cannabis farm, which resulted in us making oil for cancer patients, which was a fantastic experience as well, but very risky and very stressful. So off the back of 3 or 4 years of doing that, you know, the move to Blackpool seemed quite a good way. We just shut the farm down because we'd ended up not making any money because we were just trying to help so many people who were coming forward that had cancer, and people who had relations that had cancer. So we ended up, you know, running at a loss almost. So we closed that down and decided it'd be a good time to kind of perhaps come and explore what we could try and do in Blackpool. Move myself out an environment that was probably not so conducive for my own spiritual development.
So you took kind of a leap of faith, didn't you? You really kind of just went for it. Your family came with you, went with you to Blackpool, you know, picked everything up and just went, you know, just kind of went with it.
You know, there was a few surrounding factors to that. You know, Tyler was in a bit of a rut. There wasn't a lot of work in the area, and not even a lot for a youth to do in that particular part of Scotland, apart from get into drink and drugs, and you know, so we were all kind of treading water, and we decided that it would be a good move for us all. Though there was difficult aspects to that. My daughter was expecting her first grandkid, and my father hadn't long died, so my mother was on her own. But we felt for the greater good for the majority, because my daughter was settled with her husband. They had a nice little house together, and so they were both had decent jobs. So we felt, although it was hard to leave them, it was still, they were to some degree quite well situated. And my brother stays quite close to my mother, and also my daughter Jade, we knew she would look in on her and keep her okay. And Blackpool's only 2.5 hours away. If anything had went badly wrong, it's not far up the road. So there were other factors than seeing opportunities to share Krishna consciousness. Again, I suppose part of that kind of institutionalized, coercive preaching that I'd been subjected to over years, was still some of that in there, that, you know, if you're not directly sharing Krishna consciousness, you're wasting your life, you know. So there was bits of that in me, and probably still little bits that I'm still working out that were in there. So there was a few factors, but yeah, we definitely saw an opportunity to do something.
So tell us a bit about what you're doing now in Blackpool. You know, you've been there for about 4 years. You've taken a leap of faith. Tell us about the kind of community that you're creating, and some of the activities going on.
Yeah, well, Blackpool started off you know, like anything, all we knew of Krishna consciousness was our experience within the movement. So very much we started off traditionally, you know, with traditional kirtan and trying to distribute some books in the area and just having strictly Krishna conscious programs. But then we used to cook on a Saturday, and we found we inevitably always cooked too much. But there was quite a community of homeless round about where Barbara's guest house was. So we started to take food out on a Saturday night once a month when we were coming down to visit. And then after we moved down, we decided to explore that a little bit further, and we got involved with Parashuram's Food for All project, and he's been great. He fully supported us with whatever we needed, you know, despite our difficulties with the institution. Para was able to, you know, have a slightly bigger vision, and he pulled us on board to help out the Food for All project, and that allowed us to get little pots of funding to help support that. It endeared us to the local public. You know, we did some blatant PR. You know, we got High Vis Fest with Jagannath on the back and Hare Krishna Food for All project, and we did a little bit of advertising unashamedly to kind of promote that aspect of what we did. And that led to us being involved in a project with Lancaster University and another couple of grassroots agencies, where we were collecting information on some of the economic, social and housing issues that were going on in central Blackpool. We got a bit of funding for that, and we really enjoyed that. And that led us again to get involved in another few agencies. We started working with the Rough Sleepers Collective agencies and the Homeless Projects, which are multi-agency projects. And that started giving us other contacts in the area. And then through that, we got involved in a project called Time to Change, which was run by Lancashire Mind, all about mental health and promoting mental well-being. So we got some funding to run several projects through that. We did some diet for a healthy mind, and we did some meditation programs. That got us involved with another project run by the NHS, which is, funnily enough, called the Hare Bus. I can't remember exactly what the acronym stands for at the moment, but the acronym worked out to be Hare, so it was a Hare Bus. It's something about health, cool, resilience, information. So we did some stuff with them as well, going out and signposting people to what was available for their mental health, signposting them to what our group did. And things have just kind of grown arms and legs from starting to feed one or two people in need round about the project that we were running. and allowed us to actually start to experience that there was a lot more ways to share Krishna consciousness than the institution had boxed it into, and allowed us to start to explore other areas. We started to find out that by getting involved in these other things, local litter picks and promoting other things that were going on in the community, that people then would start to take an interest in what we were doing, and allowed us to have a voice in areas that we wouldn't normally have, and so all these cooperatives have then allowed us to present ourselves to the National Lottery, who have now given us a pot of funding to connect with other spiritual groups, to promote spirituality in the community, and to find progressive ways that spiritual groups can work together to address some of the complex issues that our communities face. So that's what we're up to just now. We're part of what's called the Community Spirit Project. So we're kind of heading that up, and connecting with other spiritual groups in the area. We're running multi-faith book tables, and we're running a series of talks, which you were kind enough to come down and kick off for us with your fantastic presentation on the history of the Hare Krishnas and your own journey into Krishna consciousness. So that's going to be highlighting different spiritual groups. Next month we've got the LGBTQ Liberty Church coming to give a little talk on how they reconcile their differences with the traditional Christian view, and how they started. And in exchange, we're going to want to cook for them in a couple of weeks as well. And we're making friends all over the place.
It's really good.
Through that project, which is great. We've got the Mormons coming to give a talk. We've got an ex-Jehovah's Witness coming to share his experience as part of that event. We've got a very liberal Methodist minister coming to share her experiences. We've got a friend of mine who's a pagan minister going to come in and share his story as well. So that's opened up a whole new world of friendships. And
you're certainly serving the community in a lot of different ways, which is great. And I was aware of that through some of the social media stuff I've seen over the last year, but particularly when I came to Blackpool last week and saw just how connected you particularly were with the community. I mean, I haven't met every single devotee in the world or even the UK, but I've certainly not met a devotee project or community in the UK that's doing the same things as you.
Well, there's a couple of things that kind of really inspired me over the last year. A couple of things I've read. One, I've got them written down. The first thing was a book I read by Srđan Popović, who's a Serbian punk rocker, but he was on the front line of actually bringing down the Milosevic government in Serbia, and he did it by means of starting a kind of humorous propaganda against Milosevic's wife, who was a kind of figure of fun for most of the Serbian community. So he then wrote a book and got involved in a few other social revolutions throughout the world. But the kind of core of the book is that if we want to see, or if we want to bring people or open up people to hearing what we have to offer, then we have to extend ourselves into an area of community concern that affects them. So he was promoting the idea that well, one person he worked with, for example, was trying to promote or get society to look at the issues of the homosexual community in one country, but nobody had any real interest in that. So he got involved in housing issues, and he started a campaign to create cheap social housing, and the whole country got on board with that idea because they knew it was a necessity. And then after he'd been involved in that, he was able to then present his ideas on perhaps greater tolerance to the homosexual community. And because he got himself a voice through this other avenue, then people were more open to what he actually wanted to promote. So that was the kind of first thing, or one of the things that really influenced me. Another wonderful thing I heard was by Urmila Devi when she was doing a podcast with Namras, and she asked the question, what would our communities look like if they became Krishna conscious overnight? And that really intrigued me, you know, that a wholesale change wouldn't be possible. It would be a gradual change, you know, as people, even if people immediately adopt the concept of Krishna consciousness, then we still have a society in place, you know, the bins still have to get taken out, you know, the factories are still working. Would there be football? Is there sport? How would society look? And how would that work around to becoming eventually a Krishna conscious society? You know, because obviously we wouldn't all just drop tools and put a dhoti on, you know, and society would then just stop. So it would have to be a gradual reworking, and most of the infrastructure would stay. It would be a change in how we made policy, how we made decisions, you know, and what kind of products were being produced for society. So that really interested me. And then a wonderful thing I read by a rabbi called Jonathan Sachs, and now he said that the preservation of the free will and dignity of the individual is of primary importance in the divine project. And I thought, wow, that kind of blew me away. How you know, do we allow people to preserve their free will and then enter into a dignified process of self-development? And the final thing I wanted to share was a thing by Terence McKenna, who I believe did a kind of lot of stuff with LSD and research into that kind of area. But he said if we made decisions based on creating a beautiful outcome, so those kind of four ideas I've really been kind of trying to work with to create a bigger picture of God and a more inclusive ideology, opening myself up to wider cooperatives, and also being able to see the benefits of other well-being processes, other spiritual processes, and the understanding that, you know, the devotee community as we have it isn't really going to change the world, you know, that we're actually, you know, almost stuck in certain parameters that most people don't want to adopt, you know, so yeah, that I decided to work with people who actually wanted to change the world, and very few of them are devotees. As we understand devotees, most of them have come in contact on my own journey and just connected with, and found they had a similar worldview, where even though they had a different spiritual perspective. So we're starting to form cooperatives with people who actually want to make a change in their communities, who actually want to help people to move forward in their own well-being, and are prepared to give their time and energy into supporting that, and we become part of that well-being process that's many branched, but we offer a kind of spiritual element within that.
Do you find that you've got more freedom because you're not part of an institution, or you're free from an institution? Do you feel more flexibility?
There's no ifs and buts of that. You know, the institution restricts the individual from expressing himself. We lose our individual identity into a collective identity, and it really puts the brakes on spreading Krishna consciousness. You know, and that's not to say, you know, institutions should be scrapped. What it is to say is institutions should know its place and its limits. You know, and they're trying to micromanage every single aspect of every single person's life really limits the opportunities for the individual to develop their Krishna consciousness and for the spreading of Lord Chaitanya's mission, because they try to control and oversee every little aspect of it. I mean, we've had our experience of that, being told who can run programs, who can speak at programs, who we're allowed to associate with. And it came to the point that if I had adhered to the requests of the management system, we wouldn't have done anything over the last 4 years, because we wouldn't have allowed to read a book that comes from outside the institution, or meet with people that still eat meat, or speak to or work with other spiritual groups that don't conform to our ideology, or even associate with devotees from other mats who do conform to our ideology and who are practicing the exact same process. But, you know, don't go near them. It's dangerous. It's dangerous to the institution, because they need bums on seats, and they need money to survive.
Well, I certainly agree with you 110, 120%. Absolutely. And even more so, 150% outside of the bigger cities. So I guess in London, you know, leaders in ISKCON can be a bit very picky and say, you can't talk to this person, you shouldn't talk to that person. Personally, I hate being told what I can and can't do. So that's a big no-no for me. But certainly in places like Blackpool and parts of the country where there are very few devotees, and then you have devotees from other mats and you're told you can't talk to them, it's just completely inappropriate and completely wrong.
Well, you see that, you know, you've experienced that firsthand by meeting Yashomatinandan, who is a wonderful devotee, Narayan Maharaj's disciple. And as you know, he has the community cafe called the Cozy Jazz Cafe. You know, you take 99% of ISKCON devotees in there, and they wouldn't be comfortable. And they would probably have some derogatory things to say after the event taking them there, because of how he's set up. You know, that you wouldn't recognize it as a devotional cafeteria in any format, apart from a small picture of Krishna in one corner and amongst a myriad of another 100 pictures on the wall. But Yasho feeds, everything he does is offered. So he's feeding prasadam to people every day, you know, by the hundreds. He opened up on Christmas Day for isolated people and people who had no family. And he opened up for 3 hours on Christmas Day and fed the local community. He facilitates us for kirtan on a regular basis. You know, yourself, we sat outside his cafe and had kirtan. He loved it. Without filming it, you know, no trying to keep us at arm's bay, or you know, don't sing, you might put my customers off. You know, he promotes Krishna consciousness in any way he can, and he's coming to cook at the next festival we're doing, which is called Om Fest. We're on a community festival in a couple of weeks, and he's coming to provide all the food for that. So if we'd listened to the hierarchy, we wouldn't have that connection.
let's talk a bit about the OmFest coming up. It's coming up on the 23rd of September. So certainly when I was in Blackpool the other week, you were promoting it heavily. We did some book distribution, street kirtan, and we were giving out leaflets about the OmFest. So tell us a bit about it and what's happening in Blackpool on the 23rd of July.
Sure. Well, OmFest, just before lockdown, we held a small community festival, which we called OmFest, which was funded by Lancashire Mind, to allow the general public to come in and try taster sessions of different holistic therapies. So we had a little bit of Indian head massage going on. We had a little bit of kirtan yoga going on, some meditation, some tai chi. It was very small, but it was very successful. We had about 200 people came through the door on the day. So when we got this other funding, we decided to do OmFest 2.0 to launch our community spirit project. And again, it's done on a much larger scale this time. We have a large marquee where some stuff's going to be going on, and 4 or 5 different rooms in a local multi-faith centre called the World Healing Centre that's given us use of the building for the day. So there's 6 or 7 different yogas going on. There's CBD massages. There's tarot card reading. There's angel readings. There's 4 or 5 different talks on different subject matters going on. We've got a fire pit. We've got a labyrinth. We've got representatives from the witches, Wiccan. We've got a myriad of wonderful people come to do wonderful things for us. And amongst that, Kripa Moya Prabhu is going to come and do some kirtan for us. And Adi Guru's going to come up and do a little bit of meditation for us. So it's we will be able to present what we do, and amongst a myriad of other options, we're also inviting other spiritual groups and religious groups to come and have tables. And it's really about giving people their options. It's going to work on a couple of levels. That we give the community some options for their well-being and what agencies are available out there to provide that, and what spiritual options are there for them. And at the same time, it gives us an opportunity to consult with the local community and find out what they'd like to see going on at that community centre, and what other projects they'd like to perhaps get involved in. So that's the kind of overview of OmFest. From my own perspective, it's an opportunity to give people their options to become well. If people aren't well, they'll struggle with the amount of spirituality they can adopt into their life, or how settled they can be in their spiritual practices. So it's been a wonderful experience, actually, connecting with people from different traditions, people offering different well-being approaches, and I've adopted a lot of them into my own life, and it's really enhanced my own ability to practice Krishna consciousness. I do the Wim Hof breathing. I don't know if you're aware of Wim Hof. So Wim's an interesting guy. His wife died. They had a kind of meltdown, and one day just walked into a lake. Just kind of had enough of his own head, and he walked into a lake, and he had a really profound experience by entering into the cold water. And from that, he's developed a whole series of kind of breathing exercises, yogic exercises, cold water therapies, with a myriad of well-being attached to them, and health benefits attached to them. He recently just did a series of programs working with celebrities on BBC One, doing the cold water therapies and the breathing exercises. So yeah, I've adopted that into my life. I've adopted grounding into my life, which is the process of getting barefoot and connecting with the natural energies sourcing through the earth, or coursing through the earth, and there's a myriad of well-being benefits attached to them. And although some devotees may, poo-poo these ideas, they're experiential, as is chanting Hare Krishna. So you know that your body's getting healthier when you enter into these kind of processes, and you know they're beneficial. And that gives you a much more peaceful platform to practice Krishna consciousness from, when your mind's a little bit more settled, when your body's a little bit more healthy. So yeah, it's been a wonderful experience. And I was at Gong Bath the other week, which was a fantastic experience as well, and I felt wonderful after it. So there's a lot of these sciences out there that we write off as devotees, or we think we've surpassed entering into. And even a lot of the basic kind of aspects of Christian theology, of being kind and, extending ourselves into our communities and to our neighbours. As devotees, we kind of almost think we've surpassed being nice people because we chant Hare Krishna. We just chant Hare Krishna, and we ignore other aspects of well-being, of self-development, that when you study Shastra are all in there. But I think the issue is that a lot of devotees don't really study Shastra. They pick up the initial bits and bobs, get themselves a skirt, stick some yellow paint on their face, and they get,
I love it.
they get arrival syndrome. That's me. I'm a devotee. I've got the bead bag. I've got the face paint. I've got the appropriate dress code. I know some of the words. I can shout Harry Ball when I walk into a room. And job done. Job done. I just need to mutter a few mantras here and there, and job done. Throw some unprepared food in front of my deities in the house, and job done. Where spiritual life's for me, it's a lot more of a deeper process than the superficial. And that's not to badmouth anybody who wants to wear a dhoti, or that's not a problem. It's all good for me, but it's only good if we understand what the big picture is.
It's kind of whatever works, isn't it? It's in the sense that I recognize that, let's say, the regular average British public, I recognize that some of them might be attracted to dhotis and different styles of doing things, and Indian musical instruments, and and incense and temples, and I get that, and I went through that period myself in my early 20s, and I wanted something radically different from my own white working class background from Somerset, but also most people are not attracted to Indian temples and, unfortunately, deities and beads, and people aren't attracted to those things. So how do we take this philosophy from these scriptures, these books, and make them relevant and applicable to people?
Well, that's the if we knew that would be the key to unlocking Krishna consciousness for everyone. But what we have to do is certainly have a look at the dynamic we live in, look at the communities we live in, get involved in the communities we live in, and then that will allow us to share, our stories and our experiences of our spiritual journeys. And we also have to really kind of understand the philosophies so that we can present them in the language that people are used to. You get, I've had this experience all the time with devotees, and they use, in-house language, in-house terminology that nobody can relate to. Nobody knows what it means, or they'll start talking about Krishna's Ras Leela, when people are asking them about God, and instead of just explaining, we have a conception of a personal God. We don't have to take it any really further than that initially. Can we present things in a relatable way, in a rational way, and can we bring Krishna consciousness into our own life in a rational and relatable way? So many devotees I see really struggle because they think Krishna consciousness is living by a temple schedule in their own house. And then they go from the extremes of managing it for a week and then the downs of not managing it, and then the depression that follows, and the low self-esteem that compounds the problem of I'm not a devotee because I can't get that standard, where we just bring God into our life. And gradually, as we bring God into our life, then we find certain things aren't compatible or conducive for moving that relationship forward. So naturally, we slow down on certain things, and the scales start to change over. So it's not about getting people to join ISKCON. It's not about people shaving up. It's not about people committing to 16 rounds a day. It's about people getting well in their communities, and their communities getting well. And then when people start to get well from that foundation, they can start to rationally look at their spiritual options as well. So for me, it's about connecting with a community of people that can assist in that process, you know. And I work with a variety of amazing people, you know, and some of them eat meat, some of them smoke a bit of dope, some of them smoke a cigarette round the back, but they've all got good hearts, and they're all trying to move forward in different ways, and introduce aspects of well-being into their life, and assisting others to do the same. And from that process, then we find that there's a certain percentage of people who want to take their spiritual life seriously, and you can have more serious dialogues with. You know, Krishna doesn't suggest that the whole world's going to become Krishna conscious. He suggests that, you know, a small percentage of people will take an interest in their spiritual dynamic, and from that small percentage, an even smaller percentage will actually try to develop a relationship with them. So if we believe the Gita, then we're not expecting millions of people to flood through the doors, but what we can do is assist people to start that journey in a way that's comfortable for them, with people they're comfortable with a scripture they're comfortable with a practice they're comfortable with. And it's about giving people their options. And when people are given their options, a percentage will come to Krishna consciousness. Another percentage will find themselves comfortable in another path, you know. But they've started the process, and in that process, the community's starting to gel together, and we're starting to have a better living circumstance for more people, and we're starting to address some of the complex issues that stop people investigating their spiritual options. So that's kind of where it's at for me, is creating a shadow community that really Prabhupada wanted. He didn't want us to be inviting heads of state and politicians who are the problem. You know, these people are a problem. We bring these people to the temple as if they're, you know, the people who are going to make change. And we stick garlands on them, and we take the opportunity for photo shoots with them, and we try to integrate into a society that's rotten, that's run with rotten policies by rotters. And we invite these rotters into our temples as if they're somebody special or important. You know, it's the people who are the victims of these policies that are important, you know, that we have to reach. You know, Prabhupada made no secret that the people running the countries and the heads of states and the politicians were rotten to the core with ill motivation. So I have no interest in connecting with those people. I've got an interest in creating the shadow community that Prabhupada really wanted, that was interested in the well-being of the individual, allowing them to progress into their spiritual lives comfortably. So that's what I want to focus on. And I think as devotees, we're too interested in knitting into a system and a society that's rotten, where we should be part of the alternate community. It's moving away from that society. We don't want to fight with that society because they hold the power, they hold the money. and they control the system to a big degree.
Mm.
We want to make people aware of that, and we want to let people know there are alternatives, and there is a possibility of creating shadow societies that work with those despicable, principles that are set in place for us, and the control methods that are being inflicted on us. Just to get a little bit political.
No, it's fine. It's good. I like talking to devotees about stuff, not necessarily about kind of theology or philosophy. It's good to meet devotees who have opinions.
I'm a kind of emergence of my spiritual beliefs and my punk rock ethos.
I can tell you're kind of quite anti-establishment, and
I'm anti-establishment if it's rotten.
Yeah.
I don't mind establishments if they play an appropriate part. I don't mind the institution when it's providing facility for people to come together and explore their spirituality, when they're providing appropriate literature for us to distribute and to promote those ideas. From my own personal experience, as part of a very, very cult-like aspect of ISKCON, under a very manipulative leadership program that's been passed from Balabhadra to Prabhupada Vani to now into the hands of Prabhupada Prana, all working on the same dynamic. So yeah, I'm very much anti that, but I'm not anti, I'm not anti the institution if it sees the bigger picture and wants to work within that to support the growth. And as Jonathan Sachs said, preserve the free will dignity of the individual. But I don't see a lot of that going on within institutionalized religion, unfortunately. So I'm all for promoting the old punk rock DIY ethos. Do it yourself, get out there, do something for Krishna, express yourself. Look at that lovely painting behind me.
I love it.
That was done by an amazing artist called Sam Simpson, who's part of our community. Now, Sam was also the victim of initiation into ISKCON under Balabhadra, and she's managed to re-script herself, work herself out, and she's doing some wonderful thing, dance therapies, and because that's her thing. She loves music, she loves dancing, she loves painting, she does art therapy workshops. Also, you'll see the lovely Tulsi Devi flourishing behind me, and I've deliberately put that there because that's a doff of the cap to my beautiful wife Nicola, who looks after Tulsi, and Tulsi's got some spider mite on her just now, so she's got her out in the garden every day. She's spraying every leaf, and whether we buy into the concept that Tulsi Devi is from the spiritual world or not, just by believing that, my wife is now developing so many brilliant attributes, the spiritual attributes, by taking care of Tulsi Devi. So it's about principles, and without conclusive evidence, which none of us seem to be able to produce, then it's about adopting the principles that are present in most scripture and in most traditions, and sharing these with the public, and allowing people to then experience for themselves the connection that we have through chanting, that other people have through contemplation and meditation or prayer, that the experience of group worship and glorifying God in their communities brings. It's about waking people up to that potential, painting a bigger picture of God, and we have that in the Vedas. We have that bigger picture of God, that people will come to know God in different aspects, and that people will develop their spirituality through different processes, and what's comfortable for one may not be comfortable for another, but will eventually be drawn to the appropriate direction. That's just a few. But some of the madness that goes on in my head.
I love it, and I love Blackpool. And Blackpool is a very diverse, eclectic community that you're preaching in. It's I think you said to me when I was with you last weekend, 7 of the poorest wards, so council wards in the whole country, are in Blackpool. They need, well, everyone needs Krishna. They need Krishna. They need to be loved and cared for. It's got and I didn't know this till last weekend. Blackpool's got a very big trans community as well.
Amazing. Amazing people. We've been doing some work with the LGBTQ Liberty Church, and what I will say is, never is it more evident that when you look around that room of the diverse identities that people have accepted and different ways people live, that they can see past that and all worship God together. And it's the most wonderful experience going to the Liberty Church. It's been great. So
we used to have,
and we miss out on all these experiences as devotees because right from word go we're told, that we're in a superior process, that these people are misguided, that we have, and we build it out with there's homophobic rhetoric, there's racial rhetoric, that was prevalent when I joined the movement. So devotees miss out on wonderful connections and wonderful opportunities to share God with other people who are really experiencing God by shutting down these avenues. Sorry.
Well, believe it or not, Gadai, we've been chatting for way over an hour. It's close to an hour and a half.
Sorry, my friend.
No, I'm so sorry. It's been great to chat with you. You've got a fantastic story, and certainly what you're doing in Blackpool is a great example of inclusive, progressive, radical Vaishnavism. And I hope that a lot of devotees watch this podcast, listen to this podcast, so they can really just get some ideas and see what's on the other side of the fence.